Tonight, FBI investigators at Quantico could be on the verge, perhaps, of a critical breakthrough in the Nancy Guthrie case, potentially using a new and cutting-edge technology that has proven to extract DNA from even the most difficult and degraded evidence. Our Brian Enton has learned that strands of hair were found inside Nancy Guthrie's home during what we believe were the initial phases of the investigation, and that those strands of hair have now been sent to the FBI for, quote, advanced analysis 2 months after she went missing. Until now, the Pima County Sheriff's Office has been using a Florida lab to handle all of its DNA testing, a decision that was controversial from the start.
I want to get exactly what I got from my source right. Some DNA evidence from Nancy Guthrie's home has been sent to the FBI's lab for advanced analysis. I'm told that the evidence includes hairs found in Guthrie's home. And that's an interesting part of this because we haven't known in the past that some of the evidence that they are testing for DNA has been hairs.
FBI sources have long indicated frustration with their limited access to the DNA, and the sheriff's office has struggled with analyzing so-called mixed DNA found at the crime scene. Experts believe the hair that is finally being sent to the FBI lab is likely rootless, meaning there's very little, if any, actual human tissue on the strands. Previously, those hairs were useless in criminal investigations in cases like this. But now there's something called whole genome sequencing. It's a method that extracts nuclear DNA from just the shaft of a stray hair. You don't need the root on the end. To give you an idea of just how mind-blowing the technology is, it's the same kind of DNA testing that helped break the case of Rex Heuermann, the Gilgo Beach serial killer. Of course, we don't yet know whose hair this is and whether it belongs to the suspect, to Nancy herself, or to any other person who might have wandered through her home at any time. But it does seem like investigators at least have a hunch that this could lead to something big. Joining us now is renowned DNA expert and genetic genealogist Cece Moore, the nation's premier DNA expert, and former CIA officer and NewsNation national security contributor Tracy Walter. Great to have both of you with us. Cece, this lab in Florida wasn't able to do anything with the hair, but now they've sent it to Quantico where they're able to do this sort of mixed DNA testing?
The hair is not the mixed DNA that we've been hearing about. Hair would be single source. The lab in Florida does have some capabilities, and if there had been a root, they would have already tested this and I'm sure been successful. It's a lot harder when you don't have the root, which is why we believe this is rootless hair or a hair shaft. The FBI themselves would not be the ones trying to extract DNA from that because they work with a company in Santa Cruz called Estrella Forensics. That's who has done all of the rootless hair work for the FBI, including in the Rex Heuermann Gilgo Beach murders.
So the hair actually won't be tested at Quantico. Quantico will then send it to this lab in Santa Cruz.
If it's rootless, absolutely. Yeah, they might be testing it in other ways, but to extract that DNA, that SNP profile that we need for genetic genealogy, they would be sending that to Estrella, I'm sure, because they've had such a track record with them and so much success in the past.
Tracy, why do you think they're focusing on these strands of hair, given, I mean, it could come from anywhere, anyone, at any time?
Well, you're right. I mean, I think, listen, any kind of forensic evidence that's at the scene can be attributed to anyone. It can be the suspect, it could be the victim, it could be so many different people. But the problem is we need this information to be able to rule people out or rule people in this case. And so in a case like this, where we really actually don't have a lot of digital forensic evidence, which obviously the FBI is very good at, really this becomes very, very important. We have a clear lack of video forensic evidence, as we have seen, as well as really phone and those kinds of forensic evidence. And so I think in this case, there's no question that hair is going to be important in terms of ruling whomever that is in or out. And the FBI is going to probably have to investigate if they can get a hook on it, who it is.
Cece, most hair found at crime scenes, is it rootless hair, just the shaft?
Not necessarily. I mean, it's really common to test the root from a hair with forensic evidence. But we are finding that there are thousands of cases that don't have any other type of DNA evidence. And that's why this is so
You're talking
groundbreaking.
no blood, no saliva,
Right.
no semen, nothing.
Right. And so that's why we've been suddenly able to solve cases that weren't even solvable prior to even with genetic genealogy. So genetic genealogy came in 2018. The ability that Dr. Ed Green created to extract this profile from rootless hair is even newer than that. So it's another leap forward that opens up a lot more cases to potentially be solved.
How long will it take the lab, Australia lab, to test this hair?
Well, in my experience, because I've worked with them a lot, it typically takes months. But I'm
Months.
guessing, because this is not a cold case, that they will likely push it up in priority and start working on it immediately. And then part of it is luck. Sometimes they can get DNA the first time around, and sometimes they have to go through several attempts before they can get that viable profile.
Tracy, you know, since you've been covering this case with us, there's been so much criticism of the Pima County Sheriff and the decisions that he and his team made on this case. A lot of that criticism was about the fact that they chose to use this lab in Florida, which I need to point out is quite reputable. A lot of law enforcement agencies use it and have great success with it. What's your assessment of that lab, and should the Pima County Sheriff have relied on that lab instead of Quantico from the start? Because that's a lot of people are criticizing him for making that choice.
Thank you for making that point about the lab. This is a lab that is actually certified by the FBI. This isn't some, random lab that they sent this sample to. So I just want to make that point clear. However, obviously I'm a former FBI agent. I try to go a little bit easier on anyone in law enforcement, but I actually vehemently disagree with what Sheriff Nanos did in this case. I think in a case of this nature, now listen, at Quantico, they can't just process all of the DNA evidence that comes in. This is why we have private labs, for speed and for efficiency. But in a case like this, where you may know that you may have some DNA samples, some biological samples that maybe didn't get DNA from, it should have immediately gone to the FBI. I think they lost 11 weeks of time.
Yeah, and now Cece's telling us it could conceivably be a few months before the lab in California actually gets results from this shaft of hair. Just remind us, Cece, how did they make the break in the Gilgo Beach serial killer using this exact same kind of testing?
Yeah, there were a number of hairs found on multiple victims in the burlap sacks, on the belts, and a couple other places. They were able to extract SNP profiles from those and perform genetic genealogy. And they led to Rex Heuermann, his wife, and his daughter. So pretty damning.
And so that case, that was a cold case if there was one. I mean, he had he just pleaded guilty. He'd been killing for many, many years. And these cases had gone unsolved for many, many years. So that was a case with no evidence, and they were able to crack it. I mean, Tracy, I can only hope that we're not going to wait that long. And I'm sure the Guthrie family is praying that they don't have to wait that long to get some sort of answer.
I would hope that we don't have to wait that long, but to Cece's point, we don't know how long it's ultimately going to take them. And in a missing persons case where you don't necessarily have bodies, whereas you did in Gilgo Beach, that is another issue that sort of complicates all of this as well. So you've got that passage of time, not a lot of forensic evidence, not a lot of digital evidence, and obviously no person or no victim in this case. And so I hope it gets solved a lot quicker than that, but we are dealing every minute and every second really counts.
Yeah.
We also don't know if that hair does belong to the kidnapper or not. And we won't know that until they've processed it, extracted the DNA, and been able to perform genetic genealogy to identify who that does belong to.
Yeah, I think people might not realize how many stray hairs. I mean, hair falls off the human head all the time. People walking through.
And it's not just head hair. It can be other types of hair. Facial hair, legs, arms, pubic hairs, all of those are able to be used.
And by the way, Tracy, this is a 65 or an 84-year-old woman who could not walk easily. There was blood on the front stoop, which indicates it was her blood. She was injured perhaps in some way. There might have been a struggle, in which case hair might have been, left at the scene.
I actually said that, I don't know if it was on your show, but on a different show, that if there was a struggle, it was probably a mild struggle, right? Because she is 84 years
Right.
old and she does have health conditions. However, that could absolutely be useful in this case, and that we do have some of that DNA. And to Cece's point, all those black gloves that they were talking about, you don't know that those, necessarily belong to a perpetrator in this case. So not only do you have to identify that DNA, but then you have to investigate who that DNA belongs to rule them in and out as suspects. So we're dealing with some time here.
Yeah. Cece Moore, Tracy Walder, really appreciate it. Cece, this technology is utterly fascinating. It's unbelievable what these labs can now do. Thank you so much for explaining it in a way that I think we can all understand. Tracy already knew it, but not me. Anyway.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you, ladies. Have a great weekend.
Well, today marks 70 days in the search for Nancy Guthrie, and with no suspect on law enforcement's radar, there are fears this case has gone cold. DNA samples could still hold the key, but no second crime scene has been identified yet. And the sample investigators do have is mixed, meaning it contains the DNA of more than one person. This would have to be deconvoluted, as they say, and separated before a real analysis can even begin. Renowned DNA expert and genetic genealogist Cece Moore told NewsNation earlier this week that investigators should return to Nancy Guthrie's home in search of more samples. And Cece joins us live tonight. Cece, I always get so much out of our talks. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me again.
And you joined me for an episode of my Truth of the Matter podcast, almost 500,000 people watching that on YouTube. So many of them commenting, wanting to learn more from you regarding what you said about the likelihood of saliva DNA in that house from this perpetrator. You say that detail of him holding the flashlight in his mouth can't be ignored. What evidence do you think is still left in that house?
Well, it's hard to know what they have already collected. It's possible they collected dozens or hundreds of swabs, and they're still going through testing those. It's so hard for a crime scene investigator to know exactly what to swab, since most of DNA is invisible to the eye, right? So sometimes it just is a trained intuition that causes them to just swab the correct thing. Now, if they have tested everything and haven't found a good sample of the perpetrator's DNA, I do think that it is possible to go back to her home and do some more swabbing. But as I said, I wasn't there. I don't know how many they gathered, but DNA is hardy. So it's certainly possible. There is still some DNA there. And in particular, I really do think that saliva is the most likely. And that is because of what appeared to be that bite flashlight in his mouth.
Yeah.
Somebody wrote to me that has used one of those and agreed with me that it would produce a lot of saliva and it would be very difficult not to leave some of that behind.
And I know that you've told me before that sometimes, even light switches or really unassuming places in a home can crack an entire case. It was interesting. Right. Our NewsNation's Brian Enton spoke with a key source who said that the supervisor overseeing the case had never previously investigated a homicide before. I mean, you say this comes down a lot of times to experience and the gut of the person going in, surveying that area and taking as many samples as is needed. Does that concern you to hear that they had never investigated a homicide before?
Well, even if he hadn't, I'm sure the crime scene investigators were very experienced and they would be the ones that would be collecting that DNA. And so I still have confidence that those very experienced, skilled crime scene investigators would know, how to collect the DNA. But because, as I said, it's invisible, they may not have swabbed exactly the right thing to find that individual's DNA through no fault of their own, just because it's hard to know in a house like that, where would you even start other than the obvious places?
And investigators already gave the home back to the Guthrie family weeks ago. I mean, could that pose a problem if they go looking for more samples? Or in your opinion, should they still go back and re-swab?
Well, it could, but because they know who has been in that home, right, they can still eliminate those individuals' DNA. So I don't think it's as big of a problem as I've heard a lot of people speaking about. The only issue to me would be more if there was saliva on the ground, for instance, or a rootless hair that could also solve the case. It could have been tracked back out. It could end up on the bottom of someone's shoe. But if there is something that is still on a surface, then I think it's still, possible that they could get that person's DNA if they haven't done that already. Now, of course, this is, a little bit of a Hail Mary, but I think everything in this case right now, based on at least what we know, appears to be that at this point.
And you told NewsNation earlier this week that new technology in your field could help solve this case. Can you tell us more? What would that new technology be and be able to do? And is there any hope that investigators will get access to that soon?
Well, because we are working with mixed DNA samples so often in forensics evidence due to sexual assaults or the violence in, personal crimes, this is something that the scientists have been very interested in pushing forward and improving the ability to deconvolute, as you mentioned. So there are new software packages that are being developed all the time, trying to make it possible to deconvolute these more complex DNA samples like it appears they have in this case. There's also some machinery, some equipment that I was told is not ready yet, but that could actually help to deconvolute the DNA from the beginning. So typically the scientists are working with the data that comes out of the lab.
Tonight, could FBI investigators at Quantico be on the verge of a critical breakthrough in the Nancy Guthrie case? Strands of hair found inside the 84-year-old's home now sent to the Bureau for advanced analysis. The move coming as the search for Nancy hits day 77. Now, you'll remember investigators were already working with a DNA sample, but it was mixed, and it will need to be separated out before it can even be analyzed. DNA experts telling NewsNation the advanced testing on this hair sample likely means investigators only found a partial hair follicle, not one with the root intact. But we know the tech exists that can solve cases even with a rootless hair. Just recently, mitochondrial DNA found on a hair collected from a Gilgo Beach crime scene linked Rex Uerman, the now admitted serial killer, to his victims. Here to discuss the very latest developments is renowned genetic genealogist Cece Moore. Cece, it's always so good to see you. Thanks so much for coming on tonight.
Thanks for having me again.
Tell us about what's possible even with a rootless hair. Can we successfully extract DNA from it?
Absolutely. And that is thanks to the brilliant Dr. Ed Green from UC Santa Cruz. He created and developed and now has refined a process for extracting autosomal SNP profiles from rootless hair. This was something that scientists told us could not be done. And so he proved everybody wrong just a few years ago. So this is even newer than investigative genetic genealogy being used for law enforcement purposes. This is really the most important step forward that I've seen in the last couple years, because it meant that thousands of cases that only had rootless hair, that's the hair shaft, could now use genetic genealogy to identify the suspect.
It's amazing. How long could it take to get answers about the hair sample handed over to the FBI?
Well, I am imagining that the FBI is first looking at that to determine whether it could be consistent with Nancy's hair or any of the family members or known individuals who had been in that home. If not, I am assuming that they will forward that on to Estrella Forensics, and the processing will begin at that point. It can take months. In my experience with them, I've already helped law enforcement solve 6 cases using rootless hair alone. And so I know it can be done. My guess is that because this is not a cold case yet, and most of the cases are where we're using rootless hair, that they will push this to the top of the priority list and get it done more quickly. But it's impossible to predict just how long, because sometimes the first 1 or 2 tries are not successful. I've seen cases where they had to try 3 different times before they were able to extract that SNP profile.
Is this the biggest hope that we have right now to solve this case?
It's hard to predict since we don't really know what's going on in the inside. But based on what we know at the moment, this is what I'm most hopeful about, because it will be a single source DNA profile as opposed to the complex mixture that they've been trying to work with. But the question is it the suspect's hair? Is it the person who kidnapped Nancy? We won't know that until it's been processed and identified.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. With the time we have, I want to talk about the role that DNA played in solving the Gilgo Beach murders. Talk to us a little bit about that. Rex Uerman, confessing to an 8th murder last week. He was first identified as the suspect, and DNA and hair DNA really cracked this case. Tell us more about that.
Yes, and the FBI used Estrella Forensics for that case as well. It's very interesting because 9 strands of rootless hair were found on the burlap sack, on the belt, and on the tape on 6 to 7 of the victims. And this hair was traced back to Rex Uerman himself, his wife, and his daughter. And they've talked about mitochondrial DNA, but actually they used whole genome sequencing, meaning autosomal SNP DNA, to make those identifications. I believe that may be one of the reasons he decided to finally confess.
Wow. And I mean, people talk a lot about the DNA found on the pizza crust that was thrown in the trash, but you do a really good job educating us in terms of what actually solved this. It was the hair DNA first, and then they had to go out and confirm that with the DNA found on the pizza crust to determine it was a match. Is that how that worked?
Yes, that's exactly right. They were very quiet about what they were doing at first because New York is very strict about what is allowed in court. And so I believe they were doing that autosomal SNP analysis and genetic genealogy behind the scenes when they were just talking about the mitochondrial DNA. And I believe that that is exactly what happened. There was a Fry hearing back in late 2025, which is a hearing where the judge gets to decide whether that evidence can be used or not. And whole genome sequencing like this had never been accepted in a New York court. So it was a huge precedent when the judge allowed it.
Thank goodness, right? Thank goodness that judge allowed that evidence to come forward. And very quickly, Cece, before I know you said you were confident genetic genealogy would eventually solve the Nancy Guthrie case. So many people losing hope. We're 77 days in. Do you still believe that?
I do. And I have talked about this possibility of there being rootless hair all along. And it sounds like from what we've heard, they've had this since February. They may have been trying to do some work with it already, or perhaps they had it and didn't realize. And as they were going through all of the things they collected, they may have come across this hair and realized they had something that could break the case wide open.
Cece Moore, wonderful to have you on tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
There is a small lead, small development that's being reported by one of the local TV stations that received one of the ransom notes that Savannah Guthrie stated they believed to have been real. And they were reporting that on February 11th, either Nancy and the FBI put a small amount of money in that Bitcoin account along with a message they were ready to talk. So clearly they were responding to one of those notes. And after February 11th, the station is now reporting that everything has gone silent. There was no further communication indicating that something tragic might have happened at that point.
Does that lend any credibility to the fact that whoever was sending that request, I know that Savannah Guthrie said she believed that it was a legitimate ransom note. But does anybody else, do authorities believe, does the FBI believe it was legitimate? And does that indicate it might have been?
Yes, I think that it was in fact the FBI that probably, I shouldn't say probably, but sources are that there was some belief among law enforcement that that note was legitimate, and therefore that's why they responded to it. But I think, sadly, that by the time they responded, something had happened because they never came back with any more messages.
The sheriff, in the meantime, has found himself in more hot water. He was due to submit some answers to a probe. This is about his application to work in Pima County Sheriff's Department decades ago. But there was some evidence that he had lied in his application about his work experience. What's happening with that investigation into him, and might he be ousted?
Well, it wasn't just that he had lied about his work experience. There was a recent lawsuit in which he was under oath where he lied about his work experience. He also is being sort of raked over the coals here, certainly by local media and also some national media, about the fact that he actually beat up a suspect who was handcuffed, and that suspect had to be taken to the hospital. And he also is being, and he was suspended for 15 days following that incident. There was also a suspension related to him lying lying about having stopped someone when they finally saw the footage that he had in fact stopped that person. And he got suspended for that, and also for using vile language towards a woman during his working hours. So there's a lot of things piling up against him. What we're waiting for is today he is answering a bunch of questions asked by the Board of Supervisors pursuant to a deal that they've struck. And we're waiting to hear what those answers are. And hopefully tomorrow we'll have more on that. The board meeting is still ongoing, but we have a very good source who's prepared on our show before, on your show before, to come on with us and explain what Sheriff Nanos had to say about those allegations of perjury and other things.
It's worth noting all those allegations of behavior, which is unbelievable. They all happened, they're not recent, correct?
Well, as far as we know, these were suspensions. I mean, since he's come to Pima County, we don't know what goes on, but he's moved up through the ranks, and he's the sheriff now.
Those allegations, yes, those were all decades ago. But as you point out, we don't know what might have happened in its time. It's just hard to believe that somebody like this is the sheriff of Pima County with a history like that, which I guess is why the Board of Supervisors is taking this all so seriously. And again, no indication that, at this point in time, 80 days later, that removing him is going to make any difference on the case. Listen, you have covered so many cases like this also for decades. And in your new book, you're taking us behind the scenes of these major criminal cases that you've covered and the role that the media plays in them. You're also disclosing a lot of pretty high profile information about these cases.
That's right. I'm telling you information that nobody will tell you. You've covered cases like this. Actually, we covered one together. There are 4 cases in the book, and I'm taking you behind the curtain and then behind that curtain where you're going to get to see what really goes on. Starting, the first case is the Holly Bobo case, which we actually did together when we were at ABC. And during that case, I had a chance to talk to that family about the 3 years they waited for their daughter, Holly Bobo, to be found after she had been abducted, raped, and ultimately murdered, which we found out when her body was found, or her remains. So in that, they were besieged by charlatans and people pretending to be wanting to help them. And when I spoke to the family long before the trial occurred, Karen Bobo told me that she was about to go on and this woman was advising her and helping look for Holly through the media, using the media. And the woman said to her, you should not wear that black. You should wear blue. It makes you look less guilty.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our NewsNation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.